Hey guys, it's Cam from Craft and Tailored. In this episode of What Is On My Wrist, we're talking about an icon. That's right, it is the Heuer Monaco reference 1133B, baby. The B stands for blau or blue, depending on where you're at in the world. So we've talked about the Heuer Monaco before on the channel. We had a really nice 1133B before, but we had a really awesome and exciting version of this icon in stock. We found a really cool one that I wanted to kind of share with you. And it's an icon, it's a bit of a legend in its own right. It was really cool. I was talking also about the Zenith A386 as well, and these watches kind of both came out at the same time. There was a bit of like a race to create the world's first automatic movement. And so I figured, why not feature this one, talk about it on the channel. I love these watches, and this one is so cool. I just had to share it with you guys. So the Heuer Monaco is one of the most iconic designs to have ever come from the Heuer brand. The watch is literally a square block. It's like, I mean, look at this thing. It's like a chunk of squareness on your wrist. It's awesome. So really kind of interesting and unique design. It's not like your, standard wristwatch shape, it's its own thing. The other thing too that is really rad about the 1133Bs, or the 1133 reference as a whole, and the Monaco as a whole, is it definitely is a cornerstone of the Heuer brand. And it has an iconic status, not just due to the fact that it's an oddly kind of shaped watch, being that it's a literal square, but it was featured in a lot of racing films. Steve McQueen wore one in the 1971 film Le Mans. So it's kind of a true McQueen watch. It's really unique and interesting. And I think that it's cool because the 1133 was part of a trio of watches that Heuer introduced in the year 1969 to house their new line of automatic chronograph movements. So we were talking a little bit about this in the Zenith A386 video. In the later part of the 1960s and ultimately leading up to 1969, there was kind of this race to create the world's first automatic self-winding chronograph movement. Up until that point, everything was manual wind, and there were a lot of companies kind of racing to try to figure out how to create an automatic chronograph. It makes sense, back in that time, these watches were being used as tools. So, manually winding a watch is kind of a technical deficiency, while you had other watches like, for example, like the Oyster Perpetuals, or just perpetual-based watches in general that were automatic self-winding. They required less maintenance, less kind of thought. They worked, and being that chronographs were technical watches used mainly for technical applications, timing, calculating, that kind of stuff. In any case, Heuer, in joint partnership with Hamilton, Breitling, Buren, they basically kind of all worked together to introduce the caliber 11 movements in 1969. And there's a lot of controversy over who really developed the first automatic movement. Is it Zenith? Is it Heuer? Is it Seiko? I think Zenith was the first one to kind of publicly market and sell an automatic movement within their El Primero range of watches, the El Primero movement, but they definitely weren't the last one. So the reference 1133 was a completely new line for Heuer and was created as a design-oriented watch, more so than the Octavia and the Carrera watches. But the thing that is really kind of interesting about it, this is a racing watch, but there is an tachymeter scale. One interesting kind of facet and feature of the Monaco and a lot of the Octavia watches that were released by Heuer in the later part of the 1960s into the 1970s is that you have what is called like a flip-flop crown. So instead of the crown being here on the top of the watch in between the pushers, the Octavias in many cases had the crown on the other side of the case. And the reason for that is that way when your hand is up on a steering wheel, the crown doesn't dig into the top side of your wrist, but the pushers are still on that side so that if your hand is on a steering wheel, you can still operate the pushers. Really interesting stuff. The original design of the Monaco was actually not appreciated until much more recent times. The watch had very poor sales results, and I think as a result of it being such a design-oriented watch, it was just kind of out there and just unique and very weird. I think even today we look at like mid-century design, and a lot of of those kind of cutting edge, boundary pushing designs really don't get the appreciation and don't get, you know, the credit that they deserve until much later. The watch now for sure is an icon. You can still buy a Monaco through Heuer. In any case, that's the general jam behind the Monaco. I'll provide a link in the description below and or up here so you can check out the original 1133B video, which we dive into a lot of technical details about the watch. But I want to kind of talk about this one specifically. Interestingly, we found this watch at a show. So we were at, I think, like an IWJG show. And the funny thing about watch collecting and finding watches is sometimes things are just literally in plain sight. So we were kind of walking the show floor looking for pieces to buy and add into our collection. And I walked by this watch and the lighting in the show was really crappy. It was like very kind of, I don't even know, it was like real flat, kind of dim. And I was like, oh, that's kind of an interesting Monaco. And a couple of things that I always carry in my pockets when I'm looking to buy watches are the obvious things: a loupe, a UV torch so I can inspect luminous material, but I also carry a flashlight. What I did is I kind of was like, that dial's like really weird. It almost looked brown, you know, it kind of looked like just kind of like muddy looking. And so I picked up the watch and I hit it with a flashlight and the watch just like blew up in my hand. And I was like, wow, that is one of the most incredible tropical patinas I've ever seen in a Monaco. And so what's unique about the Monacos, and I think the type of lacquer that they were using to ultimately create these blue dials, is that you have a brass base portion of the dial, and then ultimately the lacquer is applied on top of that you know, base portion of the dial. In the early Monacos, that blue lacquer was very, very thin and had a tendency to kind of chip away or fade or just kind of like, I don't know, disappear. And that's exactly what has happened in this watch. The funny thing about tropical watches and watches with patina is that it's a very taste-based thing. You know, essentially what we're talking about with patina is, it is a type of like damage. If you look at something that is brass, that is patina, that is developed a patina, it's an oxidation to that brass, right? So it's technically like a byproduct of age and in some cases like damage, which is really weird. The funny thing about this specific 1133B is the case retains all of its factory finishing. The case is very, very sharp. It has, you know, if you really look at the case of an 1133B, and we'll provide some close-ups, if you look at the finishing on that case, it's very intricate, it's very thought out. You can definitely tell when an 1133B and or a lot of watches, you know, in my experience, have been polished, because a lot of the finishing that came from the factory and a lot of the tooling resulted in intentional finishing of the case. You look at like the striations in the case and the brushing and all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of intentional thought put behind the way that these cases are finished. So the way that the case works for an 1133 and some of the other Heuer watches and just other watches in general is it's really kind of like a pressure fit case. You know, this really isn't a watch that you want to take scuba diving. It wasn't intended to go diving. Is it water resistant? Yes, but my theory is that the watch probably had some kind of moisture or something there that ultimately kind of created this tropical intense patina. There were a lot of different processes used to ultimately create the colored dials, and the lacquer, whatever they were using, in many cases was very, very thin. We even see it in like Audemars Piguet with the 5402s. You see it in, you know, like the 3700 series of Patek Philippe. You know, that anodizing or that dial finishing process was like really, really thin. So in any case, you know, kind of, is he in the shot?
Right.
Cameo by Remington. The Office Pony. So in any case, I could wax on about the patina of this watch forever, but I think that this is ultimately what makes watch collecting and hunting watches like this really fun, is seeing something like this. And you know, I wasn't the only dealer at that show. It was really interesting because a lot of guys were just kind of passing this watch, and I like grabbed it, hit it with a flashlight, and was like, wow, that's unique. The dial to me has like this almost like blue, copper, orange, purple kind of fleck to it. It almost looks like gold dust that's been sprinkled onto the dial. And I think that this is true luxury, true exclusivity, where, you know, this watch is the only one in the world that has this patina. I actually have not seen another 1133B with a patina that is this striking and this vivid and this interesting. So I'll definitely provide a link in the description below so that you guys can check this out. And if you haven't done so already, check out the other video on the 1133B. I'll provide a link up top and in the bottom so you guys can learn a little bit more about the history of the Monaco. So in any case, guys, thanks for tuning in. As always, if you haven't done so already, hit the like button, subscribe, check us out on Instagram @CraftedTailored. And if you've got watch questions, we're here and happy to help. Drop us a line at info@craftedtailored.com. Thanks for tuning in, guys. I'll see you in the next one. I'm not that good at math, so I'm good at other things. You know what I'm saying? Just kidding.